Good morning. Distinguished guest speakers, Your Excellencies, and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mriganika Singh Tawar. I have the pleasure of being your MC today. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I welcome you to the India-Singapore Futures Forum. The event is organized by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. To commence the proceedings, I would like to invite Associate Professor Iqbal Singh Sivia, Director of the Institute of South Asian Studies, on stage to deliver the welcome remarks. Dr. Sivia, please.
Thank you, Mriganika. Ambassador at Large, Professor Tommy Koh, Ministry of Foreign Affairs Singapore, Excellency Dr. Shilpak Ambule, High Commissioner of India to Singapore, Excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I welcome you to this inaugural version of the India-Singapore Futures Forum. Now, many of you are aware that this year Singapore and India celebrate the 60th anniversary of our bilateral relations. Over these 6 decades, the relationship has grown from strength to strength, and there's several milestones that I could throw up, but just to highlight perhaps 2 or 3 from the recent years. And again, I'm quoting some things that many of you are already familiar with, but a few years ago, the Indian Unified Payment Interface System, or the UPI system, was merged with or linked with Singapore's PayNow system. This allowed for secure, cost-effective border remittances. In 2024, the relationship between Singapore and India was elevated to a comprehensive strategic partnership. And as of now, Singapore actually contributes about 23% of the foreign direct investment into India. Now, this is just an indication of how the relationship has broadened and deepened over the years. And I can safely say that the collaboration between India and Singapore spans multiple arenas. This range from semiconductor manufacturing to financial connectivity to even putting satellites into space as well. And this is something we'll be engaging with today. But the 60th anniversary is also a time not just to tap ourselves on the shoulder and appreciate what we've already achieved together, but it's also an opportunity to reflect and think about which directions this relationship can go in the future. What sort of areas of cooperation and sectors where the relationship can be broadened and deepened even further? And that's why the name is India-Singapore's Futures Forum, where we ponder about the future. Now, as we ponder about the future and think about directions in which this relationship can develop even further, we have to be very aware of the context in which this relationship will be shaped. Now, as all of you know, the international order, the global order, is evolving. The multilateral institutions, frameworks, and approaches that we've been used to are being questioned. The future of global trade is also in the air. Not to mention how COVID brought home to us how vulnerable supply chains themselves are. The ongoing US-China strategic competition is impacting the global system, and one particular dimension that is affected quite comprehensively is the arena of technological competition. And I won't go too much into this because I know speakers will, but I just want to highlight one thing here, that when we look at the news that's coming out, the geopolitical, geoeconomic competition, we often think about the tech arena as one of competition. However, the tech arena is also one of partnership. Technology has developed to the stage at which it has because of mutual international partnerships and exchanges. And this is why in our discussion today, we are going to be looking at critical and new technologies itself. As India and Singapore celebrate the 60th anniversary of their diplomatic relations, critical and emerging technologies have become a vital and essential arena of bilateral cooperation. In an increasingly contested global landscape, India and Singapore are partners that can leverage their complementary strengths in the digital and technology domains to navigate and overcome global disruptions. In today's India-Singapore Futures Forum, we will discuss opportunities and challenges in 4 critical areas. Those are artificial intelligence, semiconductors, fintech, and space technology. The morning session commences with a discussion about the geopolitical and geoeconomic context in which Singapore and India's relationship will develop. After that, we will go into discussing the future of cooperation in the domains of AI. Now, as some of us are familiar with, India and Singapore signed a Memorandum of Understanding on Digital Technologies in 2024. Now, this is an important MOU because it provides a comprehensive blueprint for joint AI development. India's vast data resources, technological talent pool, and thriving startup economic ecosystem align seamlessly with Singapore's strengths in governance, frameworks, research infrastructure, and global market connectivity. Besides AI, tremendous potential exists to boost cooperation across a range of technology issues, including fintech, space, and semiconductors through the India-Singapore Collaborative Industrial Research and Development Program. Indeed, India and Singapore are prioritizing bilateral cooperation in critical and emerging technologies, and this focus could extend into related issues like quantum, advanced biology, and next-generation telecommunications and space. By emphasizing cooperation in critical and emerging technological issues, India and Singapore are positioning themselves to create a new future for themselves, but also contributing to, perhaps I should say, the stabilization of an increasingly fluid and evolving global context. This morning, we are honored to have a distinguished lineup of speakers who will shed light on key areas mentioned earlier. By the end of the session, our goal is to offer a comprehensive understanding of how India and Singapore can further shape our shared economic future. I would like to thank our guest of honor, Professor Tommy Koh, for joining us today, and I'll have the pleasure of engaging him shortly. But I'd also like to thank all our panelists who will be sharing their insights and their thoughts with us and their perspectives. And before I end, I would like to thank everybody who's contributed to making this inaugural Futures Forum possible. Of course, apart from my colleagues in ISES, which I'll come to later, I'd like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, the Ministry of Trade and Industry from Singapore, and I'd also like to thank the Indian High Commission for all their support, encouragement, and cooperation in putting this event together. So like all of you, I look forward to the discussions today. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Sivya. I would like to now invite His Excellency Dr. Shilpak Amule, High Commissioner of India to Singapore, to deliver the opening remarks for the forum. Your Excellency, please.
A very good morning to all of you, Ambassador Tommy Koh, Professor Iqbal, Ambassador High Commissioner of Sri Lanka, Mr. Satpal Khattar, Mr. Vinod Rai, all my distinguished representatives, delegates, friends. Today we stand here to launch the inaugural India-Singapore Futures Forum. I'll just spend a few minutes to brief you as to what has happened in the last 9 months in the relationship. This year marks the 60th birthday of Singapore. It also marks the 60th anniversary of our bilateral relations. We were one of the first countries to establish ties with Singapore as soon as it became independent. We started in August 2024 with what we called as the India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable. I keep harping on it because it's one of the very unique mechanisms we have with any other country. Or in fact, in any other bilateral relations, you have such a unique mechanism. It started with 7 ministers, it increased to 10 ministers. It is followed by an India-Singapore business roundtable on the sidelines. The leaders meet, talk on bilateral relations, regional issues, global issues, and even domestic internal issues. And they have identified 6 pillars of our collaboration, which looks at the future of the relationship, which includes the whole digital space, skilling, advanced manufacturing, connectivity, health, and sustainability. So these are the areas which were identified, and we had to take the collaboration forward in these areas. Prime Minister visited in September of 2024, very early on in his 3rd tenure. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong was also had just become Prime Minister, and our idea was that both of them spend quality time together and establish a very good relationship, personal relationship, and we succeeded in that. During the visit, we signed 4 agreements, one in the digital space, in education, skill development, and advanced manufacturing, semiconductors. It was followed by our education minister's visit, where we identified a few areas of collaboration. We agreed to twin schools, twin universities, have collaboration between the respective organizations which develop curricula for school, and we are now trying to see what we can do specifically on the ground. We also had the visit of our Ports and Shipping Minister for the Maritime Week. If you had seen what's happened in India in the budget and post-budget, we are actually reforming our entire maritime sector. 5 bills are there in the Indian Parliament, 2 of which have been passed. 3 more will be passed in the next session. This will actually transform the way shipping happens in India, as well as make it easy for people to own ships and register ships in India. So he had a very good visit. We signed the letter of intent for a green and digital shipping corridor between India and Singapore. And we've held negotiations now to convert that into an agreement, which hopefully will be signed at the next ISMR. We're looking at having the next ISMR in July this year in India. Also, we'll have the business roundtable on the sidelines of it. One thing is to start a mechanism. The other is to keep it going. So once you have 2 or 3 meetings of the ISMR, I think it will become institutionalized, and that will be very good for the relationship. President Thurman also paid a very successful visit to India in January of this year. And what in India we call as cooperative competitive federalism, where we want different states to compete with each other for investment, for development. So we took President Thurman to Odisha. He spent 2 days in Odisha. And for the first time in a state visit, we had 8 agreements signed between Singaporean companies and the state government of Odisha. This was in industrial parks, township, urban development, skills. And this leads me to the other point. For the last 7-8 months, we've had a lot of state delegations come here. Rajasthan, Odisha Chief Minister was here, Assam Chief Minister was here, Telangana Chief Minister was here. All were here to promote their states. And this is the new thing we are seeing in India, that chief ministers themselves are leading the delegation to attract investment into different states of India. And this is what we've been striving to do. We need 5 or 6 good states to compete with each other for investment and for development. So it's a good sign that that is happening. And I would like to share with you a few examples of Singaporean companies which are doing really well in India. Sembcorp, both in renewable energy and in industrial parks. You have Sabrana Jurong, which is now looking at new projects in Odisha and Assam. Capital Land and Mapletree have been doing well, are expanding. PSA is building a new berth in Mumbai, which will be one of the longest berths in Asia. And of course, IT. We've been getting calls from different states now as to please link us up with people in IT, because they all see what's the outcome in Bhubaneswar. The World Skilling Center in Bhubaneswar, one in Guwahati, has actually caught everybody's attention. So the different states want to do more with IT. On that backdrop, I will just end with 3 issues which are occupying mind space in India presently. One, of course, is the whole tariff scenario. We've been engaging with the US administration since February. Prime Minister Modi visited US in February, had a very good visit. And we've been, our trade team is with, it was in the US till very recently. We are negotiating a bilateral trading arrangement. Terms of reference have almost been complete, and we hope to achieve a conclusion before the 90-day period gets over. The other issue, of course, is the whole economic development and focus on manufacturing. We are definitely trying to do more, give more incentives, and different states are competing for that. Third, and not the least, but the most important part, is what happened on 22nd of April. It actually changed what we've been doing for the last 5 years. We had managed to normalize Kashmir in the last 5 years in terms of tourists who were going there, in terms of the turnout of our elections. But what happened on 22nd April was, of course, unfortunate but very tragic. the manner of the killings by identifying the religion was something unprecedented. Why I'm saying this is because there will be tensions, there will be some escalation. We don't know in which, how and when, and where will it end. But the general mood in India right now is for some kind of response. We hope that is soon and quick, but I think there will be some tension in the region for a foreseeable future. On that note, I wish the forum complete success. I know it's a full day of activities, and I also have seen that there are going to be separate sessions on the whole area of space technology and space. I think these two areas are also the ones where we are actually collaborating. We had a first cyber policy dialogue last year between India and Singapore. A delegation from InSpace in India was here. We have very good startups in the space sector in India, supported by ISRO, which are actually doing well. Agnikul, and they are actually in the process of, they have developed their launch vehicle, and they have done some demonstrations. So we might be in a position soon where a private sector startup would have done a launch vehicle and would be launching the satellite from that. On that note, thank you very much. I wish everyone fruitful and productive discussions throughout the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I would like to now invite back on stage Associate Professor Iqbal Singh Sevia to deliver the introduction for the forum. Dr. Sevia, please.
Sorry to impose myself on everybody again. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Tomiko to deliver the keynote address this morning. As I was coming up, Professor Koh said, when I mentioned to him that I'm going to make some introductory remarks, he said, keep it brief, please. So, on that note, right, many moderators, many people introduce speakers, they tend to say the following speaker does not need any introduction at all. I can justifiably say I'm in one of those positions where actually Professor Tomiko needs no introduction at all. All of us are familiar with, have followed his writings, and have looked up to and drawn inspiration from what he writes, what he comments, etc. As we know, Professor Tomiko is an intellectual, diplomat, academic, and prolific author. And he's a deep thinker whose insights are drawn upon by policymakers, academics, and the wider public. And this is a unique position that Professor Tomiko occupies. I know he's already complaining about me going on now, but maybe let me instead of saying listing all the great things that he has done, which are numerous, and you have his bio in the pack as well. Let me just perhaps make a very quick note about why I feel that Professor Tomiko is the ideal person to kick off the Futures Forum that we are inaugurating today. Firstly, Professor Tomiko understands Singapore and India extremely intricately. In fact, one of his books was about India's relations with Southeast Asia as well, and I suspect we'll be hearing a bit about that as well. Secondly, he knows firsthand how to nurture, build, and sustain long-lasting diplomatic relationships. After all, he's not the ambassador at large for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for no reason, right? So this is something that he has extreme experience in. But also, and when we look at the way the global order is shaping out today, we need people like Professor Tomiko who know how to negotiate tricky geopolitical terrains and shape consensus. This is something that's extremely important in bilateral but also multilateral relations. And as we know, Professor Tomiko has held various high-profile diplomatic positions where he's used his skill towards achieving consensus. Just to give you one example, he was the president of the Third United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea when the UN UNCLOS was adopted. And I must add here, he wasn't awarded the Great Negotiator Award in 2014 by University of Harvard for nothing. So he's already signaling, and I'll just say the last reason why it's perfect to have him as the keynote speaker, he's a joy to listen to. So thank you so much. Professor Tomiko, could I invite you to stage, please?
High Commissioner Dr. Shu Pak Ambole, who's a Chinese scholar, my good friends Iqbal and Hanai, distinguished speakers and friends. My wife will say what Iqbal said this morning is largely not true. So let me introduce myself. I would say that the only qualification I have to speak to you this morning is that I've always loved India. And I consider myself an all-weather friend of India. I had faith in India when even my Indian friends had lost their faith. And I want to explain to you why I have this special relationship with India. India played a very important part in my political awakening. When I was a student in high school, I was very inspired by the Indian struggle for independence from the British. And Gandhi and Nehru were my childhood heroes. And I would say that the epic struggle, especially by Gandhi's non-violent struggle against the British, really inspired many of us here in Singapore. Also, in the early years of Singapore's independence, our first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, went often to New Delhi to see Prime Minister Nehru and seek his advice. So we have a historical debt to India. There's another secret that Iqbal perhaps doesn't know. When I was a university student, I had a Bengali girlfriend. And my Bengali girlfriend was detribalized. She had become very westernized. And I had the pleasure of reintroducing her to Bengali culture, to Tagore's poetry, Satyajit's movies, to Indian classical music and dance. Her mother was very impressed by me. Unfortunately, she was not impressed and ran away with a white man. So now let me be serious. I want to begin by expressing my condolences to the families of the 26 tourists who were murdered by terrorists in Kashmir. I want to tell the Indian High Commissioner that Singapore stands with India in fighting the scourge of terrorism. Singapore became independent on the 9th of August, 1965. A few days later, on the 24th of August, India recognized our independence. And as we all know, we are celebrating our Diamond Jubilee. There are many reasons to celebrate the Diamond Jubilee. Let me just give you 5 reasons why we should celebrate this anniversary. First, the India-Singapore relationship is a trouble-free relationship. There are no disputes or conflicts of interest between our two countries. There were, of course, occasions when we disappointed each other. For example, the decision by India not to sign the RCEP caused dismay and broke a few hearts in Singapore. I must introduce High Commissioner to the Chief Negotiator who has not recovered from her dismay. The second reason we celebrate the anniversary is that we have a flourishing economic relationship between our two countries. We have a free trade agreement concluded in 2005. Singapore is the largest foreign investor in India, and we are India's sixth largest trading partner. India has more than 9,000 companies operating in Singapore. Third, we have a very close relationship in defense. Our two armies, navies, air forces exercise together. Our joint naval exercise, one of India's longest running bilateral naval exercises with any country in the world, and this is called the India-Singapore Maritime Bilateral Exercise, which is in its 32nd iteration this year. Fourth, there's a high level of mutual trust and comfort between our leaders. The status of our relationship, as we all know, is comprehensive strategic partnership. Prime Minister Modi visited us last year, and President Tharman went to India earlier this year. As High Commissioner said, the India-Singapore Ministerial Roundtable is a unique platform which enables ministers on both sides to meet annually to further our bilateral cooperation, but also exchange views on other matters. Fifth, there are extensive links between our two peoples, our intellectuals, our cultural champions, and our civil society leaders. I served for many years as the founding co-chair of the India-Singapore Strategic Dialogue. And I played a small role in setting up the Indian Heritage Center in Singapore. Those of you who have not been, I encourage you to visit the center. It's small, but it's beautiful. One of my gurus, Klaus Schwab, has written that we've entered the fourth industrial revolution. In his view, the world has been transformed by technology. We are simultaneously experiencing a digital revolution, a biotechnology revolution, a robotic revolution, and an artificial intelligence revolution. In 2024, which is last year, Singapore and India signed 4 MOUs to enhance our cooperation in digital technologies, including AI, 5G, cybersecurity, and quantum computing. We have also launched the India-Singapore Semiconductor Ecosystem Partnership. In financial technology, we have established a data corridor connecting India's gift city with Singapore. The two countries are also exploring cooperation in space technology. I thank ISAS for convening this important forum to discuss how Singapore and India could work together to harness the opportunities of these 4 revolutions, and at the same time to discuss how we can avoid or minimize the negative consequences. Let me conclude by briefly referring to the upheavals we are witnessing in geopolitics and geoeconomics. The United States was a principal architect of the post-war rule-based political and economic order. However, within America today, support for global engagement has declined, and there's a strong impulse to turn inward. At the same time, China has emerged as a near-peer competitor. China has become more assertive and is determined to correct perceived humiliations of the past, and to secure what China sees as its rightful place in the world. Amidst a messy transition globally, what we are seeing now is, instead of free trade and open economies, a growing shift towards protectionism and economic nationalism. Global cooperation is giving way to growing competition and distrust. In face of these upheavals and challenges, we need like-minded and trusted friends, such as Singapore and India. Together, we will seek shelters from the coming storms and look for opportunities in the midst of adversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Koh. I would like to now invite our distinguished speakers up on the stage for the first panel discussion titled India-Singapore Partnership, What Does the Future Hold? First, Ms. Chan Kah Mei, Director, India Directorate at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Singapore. Next, Professor C. Raja Mohan, Visiting Research Professor at the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore. And moderating the session will be Associate Professor Iqbal Singh Sevia. I will now hand over the session to Dr. Sevia. Thank you.
Luckily, I don't have to speak after Professor Tomiko. So I will leave it to the two speakers on stage. So Professor Tomiko, thank you for setting us off, and I think you've raised a number of points that will be reiterated, discussed in the coming sessions as well. So without further ado, as I promised, I won't impose myself any further. It's my pleasure to invite. Can I just call you Kame? Okay. I'll keep it informal, Kame and Raja. So I will go with the batting order that's stated. So Kame, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Iqbal. Thank you for inviting me and ISAS as well for organizing this conference, and Professor Tomiko and High Commissioner Mbule for coming. I think that we have this conference is also held in very uncertain times in Singapore, and I think we would have probably wanted a bigger turnout and more people to come. But I think it's a good start as we look ahead and take stock of what's been happening. So I'm happy to share what we've been doing, and I think this afternoon we have more ideas from you. I think our speakers have all outlined our relationships over the past few years, and of course a long history. And as we commence, as you said, with the in the shadow of the trade war, I think the adage in international relations that there are no permanent allies, no permanent enemies, except only permanent interests, I think comes to mind. And I think that describes how some people's perspectives of the world can be. But I think it's also quite simplistic, because I think that's not just your self-interest, but a mutual interest that we all seek to achieve. And I think the Singapore and India relationship has endured for, 60 years and actually more. It's laid on a foundation of a long historical ties and friendships and cultural exchanges and shared values and mutual interests as well. And apart from some of the things that we mentioned, I was going to say that there have been a lot of path-breaking new ideas as our nations developed, right? So I think SICA was one that Professor Tomiko mentioned. This year, actually, we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the SICA. It may not seem very exciting because of some of the news surrounding it, as well as there's so many FTAs. Singapore is 27, but in fact, at that time in 2005, it was really one of Singapore's first few FTAs, one of the top 5, even before the likes of Korea. And I think for India, it was the first comprehensive trade agreement that they signed. And even though it was signed with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, it was actually Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee that initiated the idea as he tried to bring India into the global economy and open the Indian economy up. that was path-breaking for India and for Singapore as well, as we connected with a much larger market. And I think that was the beginning of how economic relations really blossomed, despite some of the complaints that both sides or issues that have arisen after that. Another path-breaking initiative was, I would say, Amravati. So when Prime Minister Modi wanted to build smart cities in India, there was a bold vision to develop, forward-looking smart cities across India. I think Singapore responded. We were looking at working on the new capital city in Andhra Pradesh. Now, that didn't work out quite so well, but we move on, right? I think our relationships endured. We've moved on. The history is a long one, and I think we have moved past that. And I'm glad to say that that's the Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu is back in power, and we remain firm friends, and we have visited Andhra several times as well. So that history is long, and I think if you ask me what does the future hold, I think I'm confident that we will look forward to more new things that we will work on together. High Commissioner has talked about ISMR, and we have a couple of many MOUs that we have signed, and I'm glad you singled out semiconductor and fintech and AI for this session today. We will talk a little bit more about that, and I think these areas were identified by both leaders on both sides as where we could make progress to push boundaries together. They're progressive new areas, right? And it's not always one or the other. So in semiconductor, I would say India was keen to work with us. Singapore has experience in that industry, and we're keen to share. We're keen to, even though we don't have any major Singapore-owned semiconductor companies, but we have a large group of ecosystem players, and we have developed a very well-honed, very efficient ecosystem in Singapore, and we're happy to work with India on developing the same, and that's where we can add value. And on the digital, though, India is far ahead as a IT and digital powers, and they have built the India Stack, and I think that Singapore similarly has a smaller SingPass system as well, a very similar digital public infrastructure, and we think that we can be a good partner with India in this aspect. So again, always a win-win. It's mutual benefits. It's one side might bring something more to the table in one area, in another sector, the other party may be able to bring something to the table. So I think it's about win-win situations and mutual interest that we're working on in some of these sectors. So I was excited that space has been included. It's not a pillar under the ISMR, but I mean, who knows, right? So I think we're always excited to see new topics being raised from civil society, from businesses, from students, from individuals, and it makes its way into the ISMR as well. I think if you ask me where do we go from here, I think all of us, after our talks with the US and negotiating, I think we have to think about de-risking from the chaos. And I think for Singapore, our Prime Minister has said that we need to diversify, we need to look at new markets in a more systematic way. And not just that, but also building stronger engagements and partnerships with our friends. And so for that, I think for India, we're on the right path. It's just what more can we do? But it's also not just Singapore and India. I think Singapore is a very small country in Southeast Asia, in the region in Asia. And we're an open economy, and I think what we want is to be able to work with India and to see how to bring India into Southeast Asia, even though we did not join RCEP, but I think there are many ways to collaborate, there are many ways to integrate. The current fallout, I think we have of a lot of the ASEAN countries being slapped with tariffs is also because they're very integrated with the Chinese supply chains. So how, as India is on the cusp of developing its manufacturing clusters and powers, how can it integrate also with ASEAN? How can it find win-win situations in maybe specific clusters? You might compete in some areas, but you might be able to build supply chains in others. Similarly, as when China was developing its manufacturing sector. And I think that we can find that path ahead. There have been talks about the ASEAN energy grid. India is going to be, and plans to be, a major supplier of renewable energy. How do you plug into an ASEAN grid? How can we, again, find synergies in some of these areas? So these are all ideas. They're really not cast in stone, but again, I think it really requires entities on both sides to work together. for Singapore as well, we are looking at new markets, and I think India has always been, for us, we were looking at areas like, well, not just the Middle East, but Africa together. I think there was some talk long ago. Well, nothing much happened after that, but maybe that's another idea that we should look at third country kind of collaborations and new markets together and really relook at some of these areas. But for me, finally, one challenge for us in the future of this partnership, I think as Professor Tomiko said, he's always a friend of India. And I think we need to continue making friends. So for me, I'm concerned because I think that we don't want just the GLCs being in India. We want larger SMEs, small, the taukees, the businessmen, the startups, the entrepreneurs, to both be in India and for the Indian entrepreneurs to be in Singapore. We want our students, our young people to make friends. Because for them, I don't think anyone remembers Gandhi or Indira Gandhi for that matter, and that doesn't resonate with the Gen Zs, right? And so how do we build that shared history and common shared cultural sort of perspectives together? So we've initiated some small programs. We had the India Ready Talent, and where we brought some students. ISAS had also immersion programs, I think with SUTD as well. But these are very small sort of initiatives. We need sort of a wider sort of movement, and that is led on the ground. So again, to encourage the people in the room, and we hope to see more younger faces and a bigger crowd next year at the Futures Forum. But I think that's important because I think that they are the future, and without that, I think the government, all these initiatives will only go so far because they will not really be able to benefit the people on the ground. So I think that for me is the crux of the future for our partnerships for both India and Singapore.
Thank you, Kami, for laying some of the broad issues and discussion points that we should engage with today, and for opening up the stage actually for these issues. Just one thing that I think will stick with me, and I suspect we'll come back to it later, is how you very nicely framed the relationship, not just as a bilateral relationship, but one that needs to be looking at not just remaining bilateral in that sense, right? So I think that's something we'll come back to. Raja, can I invite you now to share your thoughts?
Thanks, Iqbal. Wonderful to be here this morning. I think we've already heard. You covered a lot of the positive ground, what the two countries are trying to do. Maybe I can bring some bad news to the table in the sense of, while India and Singapore are deeply committed to strengthening their ties, the context in which we're doing this is going to be very, very challenging, very, very difficult. I think there should be no illusions about that. So I think it's not just for two of us, for all countries, the biggest and the smallest, there's going to be a period of adaptation, a demand for flexibility, a demand for diversification. So I think the challenges are real. So before I get into some of those, I think it's often said, talking about the future, it's called the Futures Forum. I think Yogi Berra famously in the US said, it's difficult to make predictions, especially about future. But there we are. I think all of us are going to have to think through what are the challenges of future. There again, I think Yogi Berra also said one thing very clearly, which is the future ain't what it used to be. What we thought was the future for Asia, for the world, just even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, is not the future we are contemplating today. And I think that's where the biggest challenges are. And I think for India and Singapore, I think really this new uncertainty around the world takes us into what we might call the third phase in our bilateral relations. We had the first phase when Singapore became independent. The fact was India and Singapore drifted apart. And I would say largely because of India. The economic choices it made, the foreign policy choices it made, and the distance that emerged out of India's policies between India and Singapore, between India and Southeast Asia was real. And I think for almost 30 years after 25 years certainly, 30 years certainly, that really very little was happening between India and Singapore, India and Southeast Asia. That changed only in the second phase, what we might call the early 90s. That takes us back to the period of early 90s when India's Look East policy and when Singapore actually really extended a real helping hand to guide India through the maze of the ASEAN institutions, ASEAN geopolitics. So I think for many of the older Indians at least, will not forget that particular role that Singapore performed in transitioning India from an isolated economy, from politically distanced from much of Asia, into becoming part of the emerging Asia. Though India has always talked about Asia, we just did Bandung, 70th anniversary, 75th anniversary recently, but actually that it really fizzled out. It's only when India opened up its economy and started looking east that we reconnected, that we entered a very different and new phase. And I think today the challenge is the four broad conditions that facilitated India-Singapore and India-ASEAN interaction in the early 1990s. Those conditions are disappearing today. And I think that is the principal change that is taking place. So if you say, what are these four broad conditions that are changing? One is, if you go back to the early 90s, the Cold War had ended, the Soviet Union became Russia, China was just beginning to open up, and that there was no real conflict between the major powers. So the harmony between the major powers created a conditions where the whole region, including India could prosper and be more secure. Because if you think of the previous period, in ASEAN, in Southeast Asia, was a period of conflict. In Cambodia, in Vietnam, across the board, there were a huge number of conflicts, and I think you saw a period of tranquility and peace between the major powers and within the countries. The second, I think, was the second wave of globalization that began a dramatic expansion of prosperity across this region. That US and China are opening up to each other. The idea that that the US capital, Chinese labor, Chinese market, that this came together to produce an enormous growth for everyone in the region. And for Southeast Asia in particular, sitting between China and the US, because the Anglo-American or the Western capital was already present here. So Singapore and Southeast Asia became, biggest gainers in the period of economic globalization. But today, I think that phase is coming to an end. We are in an increasingly, disputed world when it comes to economic integration. The third element was really the regional institutions that were built. That the Bandung talked about Asian unity, but it never could deliver on that promise. It was only ASEAN in the 90s began to turn ASEAN into a regional institution framework, whether it was the ASEAN Regional Forum or the ASEAN, the East Asia Summit. In a way, ASEAN became the platform around which the long-cherished ideal of Asian unity could be built. A forum where all great powers could participate. They were not in contest with each other. A forum that could actually promote regional integration, regional trade, as well as regional security. So that was the enormous contribution that ASEAN's success in the previous decades made it actually the natural platform to rebuild unity of a kind that was envisaged right at the end of the colonial era. But I think today, that phase, that hope, that the regional institutions will take care of economic integration and prosperity is also coming to an end. And finally, the fourth big change, I would say, if you go back to the early 90s, I mean, the idea of technological change was there. I mean, the digital stuff was just coming in. You're beginning to deal with a range of things. India was getting into this Y2K mode. It was really the beginning of some of the digital outsourcing, but no one thought of a revolution of the kind that would emerge. So what has happened today with AI, with semiconductors, is the dramatic transformation of the technological picture. And with it, the impact on economy, security. So the scale and sweep and the pace of acceleration of technological change today is an extraordinary one. And I think its effects are going to be there in all spheres. And I think dealing with that is going to be the challenge. So how do we navigate this four areas? And I think that's where as we look forward, One, I think many of us would hope US and China would go back to a normal relationship, but that's not going to happen. Even if there is a trade deal between China and the US, it is going to be a competitive, contested relationship, a relationship, maybe you could think of a G2 or you could think of a US-China deal, but it will be uneasy coexistence where a rising power and a US that is uncertain are going to compete with each other. In fact, assuming they don't compete and America simply withdraws, for a lot of people that would be even worse. That is a US that pulls out, assuming, which is what some people would want to see, that could make the situation even worse. Because there's no way you can preserve a balance in this region without the American presence. And I think this is something Lee Kuan Yew fully understood when the Filipinos were throwing out American bases, that Lee Kuan Yew said, look, we need everybody to be here. The only way balance will be if all powers are here, and that's when the US-Singapore defense relationship went into a higher level. So therefore, I think we are really very uncertain period of how the great power dynamic will play out and what it does to the regional security. Therefore, I would say, what does that mean for us? That we need to do more with each other in the security realm. We're not big players individually, but I think if ASEAN and India put together, the more security cooperation we do, the more the middle powers collaborate. So then we are not at the whims and fancies of the two great powers of what they do. We are mere passive bystanders in a global tectonic shift of the way the two powers relate to each other. The second, I think, on the question of economic integration, that clearly, almost 10 years ago, it was Xi Jinping who talked about dual circulation, that the sense of reducing China's dependence on the external while strengthening its own internal circulation, those some of the consequences are with us. Now, in many ways, as people point out, the US is doing what China has started doing 10 years ago, of trying to do an industrial policy, trying to promote economic cooperation, of regenerating manufacturing industry, etc. So this is actually, I don't think we should dismiss Trump as a mad king. He doesn't know what he's doing. But anyone who's followed American domestic politics, of how trade had become a decisive factor in Hillary Clinton's loss in 2016, in the kind of surge of opinion that pushed Trump back into power, that those sections of American society that have lost from globalization, the working class, the middle class, I mean, this is not an argument that Biden dismissed. In fact, Biden himself talked about industrial policy. Biden himself talked about foreign policy for the middle class. So in a way, the domestic politics in the US is forcing a fundamental change to the approaches to globalization. And there's, if we listen to only the Wall Street and the bankers and the Silicon Valley, they would love to continue where they are. But politics, in the end, all politics is local, and the domestic politics in the US, we don't know enough about Chinese domestic politics. And I think those are driving fundamental changes in the way the global economy is going to be structured. And there, it's not just trade. In fact, if you've been looking at the ideas of a Mar-a-Lago Accord, which is really trying to force a fundamental restructuring of the global financial system, which, like the Plaza Accord of 1985, Trump wants some way of restructuring the global financial system in a way that the US can recover faster, reduce its debt of $36 trillion. So I think we're in for even bigger changes in the financial system. So there again, I think that would mean India, Singapore, and I would say India, ASEAN, need to do a lot more with each other. And there, with 700 million people, ASEAN is one of the largest economies in the world, with $4 trillion GDP. In fact, roughly equal to India. Both of us, I don't know exactly who's up, who's down today, but the fact is, we are also the fastest growing regions in the world. Therefore, how do we work together amidst the breakup of the supply chains? There is a breakup of the US-China, economic relationship. So this demands, I think, some kind of an innovative solutions, and I think that's where we need to focus. The third is the institutions that we thought we could work with, ASEAN-led Asian regional institution building, but today new institutions are coming up, and the capacity to deal with the major power competition is under strain. So there I would say, I think India has the highest stake in a successful ASEAN. Not because we love just ASEAN, I mean, we love ASEAN, of course, but the fact is, as the weakest of the major powers, for India, having a strong ASEAN, strong regional institution structure would be a bigger insurance for India rather than a weak and a fragmented ASEAN. So therefore, I think India probably would want to see a strong ASEAN institutional framework, which can hold the regional balance together in some form. Because without, if ASEAN didn't exist, we'd have to invent one, and what we have today needs to be strengthened in fundamental ways. And finally, I would say on the technological issue, that it's not just the global economy that is being divided into two, most probably, so will the technological world. That how the technological universe will unfold, because today technology is very much part of economic security, of geopolitical security. Therefore, what happens in this domain is going to be very, very demanding. And to the extent that India and Singapore have already started well with the set of new agenda, we're going to talk about it in greater detail in the next sessions. But the need for India and Singapore and India and ASEAN to find that space, because the space is going to shrink, for a simple, universal, open-ended cooperation, given the US-China competition and the division of the technological sphere. Therefore, I think we need to find innovative ways, and I think we're going to hear about AI, semiconductors, green energy, and space. Even nuclear was not mentioned, but I would say if small and modular reactors come, they're going to make a big transformation in the way AI is going to be done. So therefore, there again, I think we need to look forward. But doing that, I think, requires actually a careful political structuring, as well as being partners in at least preserving some normative structure. Because the normative structure is breaking down. The idea that the UN will make rules. I'm not even sure if the G20 Americans will show up at the G20 next time, or will they hold it the next year. So the illusions, some of those we have created for ourselves, that somehow the multilateral system will take care of it, I think that is broken. So therefore, it is small, plurilateral, minilateral, and other institutions to complement the crisis in multilateralism, both global and regional, is critical. There, I think India and Singapore need to work with each other closely. So finally, as a closing remark, I mean, I would just say this is going to be a contested world. This is going to be a fragmented world, politically contested, economically fragmented, and technologically disrupted. So it is a whole new world, I think, out there, of the likes of which we've not seen. We're not familiar with that world. Maybe there was a period in the 19th century, you could say, but today, I think this is as I said, this is not the future we imagine. But I think it demands countries like India and Singapore to put their minds together, go back to first principles, and see what we can do bilaterally, as well as between India and ASEAN. Let's stop here.
Thank you, Raja, for highlighting the conditions in which this relationship would need to be negotiated. And you started by saying that you're going to be pessimistic. I think you were realistic. But you also highlight the way in which things need to be re-looked at, rethought, reconceptualized, and the solutions need to be more innovative. So the idea with this session is basically both speakers were invited to provide some opening remarks, and then we'll open the floor. But I have a few questions as well. Maybe I'll just ask one broad question to both speakers, right? Because it's something that overlaps. Both of you addressed from a geoeconomic and geopolitical perspective the changing conditions of the world, how states will have to react and rethink their positions. So my one opening broad question to both of you would be, what sort of a role do we expect states like India to play in the new global order? And here, we often look at the global order in terms of the great powers, the conventionally described great powers. So what sort of role can Singapore expect India to play? And at the same time, can we expect small states like Singapore to have agency in this evolving global order? So I'll start with a very brief, small question. So, Kami, would you like to go first?
So I guess from a Singapore point of view, what role do we expect India to play? Well, being one of the two great powers in Asia, I think we have always said that we believe that for balance, we need India to play a bigger part in this part of the world. Whether it is on institutions, building institutions, or even defense, or just economic sort of integration. I think that's something that Singapore looks to, and I think ASEAN has made that very clear. I guess the modalities currently may not be the most ideal, and I think that as we're all struggling with different issues, trade imbalances, I think India has tried. I think with ASEAN, I remember the days where there were plans, for Myanmar to be that corridor connecting the northeast of India into Southeast Asia. We had a car rally 10 years ago, driving all the way up. We were going to build a highway from India through Southeast Asia, ports in Sittwe, and I think those were ideas, and I think that they may not have come to fruition, but it's time to then rethink about what works in this current day and age, and we do want India to be play a big role in Southeast Asia, as well as both a market, both as an investor, as well as the kind of ally and friend in that region. For Singapore, of course, we've always said that as a small country and we an open economy, international rules are very important for us, and we play by those international rules. We always remain an open economy. And for that, I think, as you say, even in we have companies from all over the world, Indian companies headquartered here, American companies, Chinese companies are headquartered here. Our ships, all ships from everywhere, have flagships can enter the Singapore port. So that's basically the raison d'etre of what we are, and hence I think for us that remains very important, which is why we try to speak with a louder voice on the international stage. Within the WTO, we play quite a big role. We contribute quite a bit as a very large global trader, as well as both in the UN. And we're looking at other bodies where we have been engaging in the OECD as well. So we have been doing that. And it's a small state, I think, for many of us, that's important. Of course, India has spoken a lot about strategic autonomy. And want to do that as well, although it's a little bit more difficult when you're a small country, but I think we have always stood up against, and we have always played that role and played our part in the international stage. Yeah.
No, I would say there is agency. The question is, are we ready to take that chance? I think I would say Singapore itself is such a fantastic example. I mean, in the Cold War, with very, very few resources, but with an economic strategy that was open-ended, could carve out a place for itself in a very, after all, the Cold War too was divided into blocks, both economic and political. So I think there is Singapore's own example provides a sense that even the smallest countries can actually have leverage if they know how to exercise it. That's one. Second, I think we're also seeing today, if you have cobalt, even you might be a small country, but if you have large amounts of cobalt, or if you have lithium, that the great powers contest actually demands, they need resources, they need friends, they need supporters. So it's not as if they can run everything. So in a way, the contest actually also creates openings. So the question is, are we coherent enough? Are we smart enough to take advantage of some of those? To say, what are the strengths I have? Sometimes it could be location. Look at North Korea. I mean, people have been predicting its collapse for at least 35 years. There it is, I mean, fighting a war in Europe. Can you believe that? Can you believe South Korea selling arms to Poland? That this notion that somehow we're all helpless victims to major powers, that's not true. I think even the poorest, even the remotest developing countries, I think, or the third world, or whatever you want to call it, have opportunities. And I think the question is about our judgment, about our assessment, and our capacity to develop the right policies to manage the global contradictions. And I think that's where I would say we need to work together. And I think, again, go back to first principles and say, look, how do we relate to each other? How do we think through some of these problems? One of the great contributions of the last 30 years, I think, has been the talking heads between India and Singapore. I think like one of these, I think have been very important for India in a sense to understand Asia in the past. But today, I think we need to sit together, Singapore think tanks and Indian strategic community say, look, where do we go from here? What is it that we can work together?
On that note, I'm going to open the for questions. I see a hand. There'll be a roving mic that comes across. Could I ask you to just identify yourself before you ask a question? Thank you. Ryan. Ryan over there.
Morning. Am I heard? Okay. Fine. My question is to Professor Rajamohan. If he believes that global multilateral institutions are failing, what agency would a regional multilateral institution like ASEAN have, especially if it also has a trade deficit with China? India grapples with $100 billion of trade deficit. What agency will, I mean, ASEAN is essentially integrated economically with China in many ways.
I would say, look, I think in that sense, ASEAN and India are in the same boat. Both of us depend on the US for exports and China for imports. But the structure, of course, the structure of that interdependence is deeper perhaps in the case of, and volumes are much larger in the case of ASEAN, which is really the largest trading, one of the largest trading partners. But I think the diversification efforts we're already seeing, 2-3 levels. I think one, the Europe, ASEAN, all the markings for Europe in ICs and other surveys has gone up. Europe is beginning to diversify, is looking for other economic partners. So therefore, we've seen Europe seeking new negotiations with FTAs from Mercosur to Asia to Japan. So I think there is the Europe as a large economic entity, which the Americans are saying, look, grow up, don't be a vassal. I mean, this to use the word of J.D. Vance, that grow up and be an independent actor. I mean, Americans are telling the Europeans, so hopefully someday the Europeans we might become. So I think there are a lot of opportunities with Europe. And similarly, within intra-ASEAN integration, I think I'm sure there are a huge number of chances there, which again might open doors for India-ASEAN cooperation as well. But some of the old frameworks, whether it's a WTO, I'm not saying it's good or bad. We are in a serious crisis mode in WTO. And even RCEP, of course, India has not signed it because of the way, India thinks its industrial, has been affected by China. So therefore, I think India now is actually negotiating with UK, Europe, and US for free trade agreements. From the High Commissioner was saying, the prospects for an early agreement between India and US. So I think you're seeing in India that is looking to the West. I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but the fact is that there are unfinished agenda in terms of what we can do between India and its Asian partners. There, I think there's a lot more to be done. So I would say, in the end, the world doesn't come to an end. Life goes on. The question is, recognize the reality that is changing, and then say, these are the new conditions I have. Therefore, what is it that I can do?
I was going to jump in a little bit more to say, the add-on, yes, ASEAN, actually you reminded us of the Asia Regional Forum, which is actually quite an amazing venture at that point in time. And sometimes things have fallen by the wayside. ASEAN had discussions with the GCC, with Canada, for ASEAN Canada, and the likes of, and I think the talk of BRICS as well. So, there are other, as we're looking to diversify and integrate with other regions, actually we might give impetus to some of these negotiations and discussions that have fallen by the wayside. Canada is also relooking at not being so overly dependent on neighbor to the south, and it wants to pick up sort of discussions on various areas. So I think that really it's for nation states and ASEAN as a region to think about what it wants to do more with other parts, and similarly to diversify as well. Yeah.
I see two hands. Perhaps I could take both questions together. So the gentleman over there first, please. Jordan, in front of you. We'll start with the gentleman and then...
My name is Charles Chow from the East West Group. My question goes beyond the AI, fintech, space, and semiconductor. As we all know, Singapore is aging fast. And my question to the panel is, are there plans now for India to share your wisdom in Ayurveda to help our elderly in Singapore? Thank you.
Hello. My name is Arun Puri. I'm on the technology side of things. My question is very different from there, especially if you're talking about the future, right? Ms. Chan referred to, and I think the other Professor Mohan as well, as friend, Indian Singapore as friends. A friend to me is someone who will talk to you when things are convenient for themselves. And a good friend is somebody, I mean, there are two other definitions. A good friend is somebody who will always make time in the calendar, and a great friend is somebody who will never look at the calendar for you. And Professor Mohan talked about middle countries and India using, middle powers and India using Singapore as a springboard to getting into Asia. To me, it was a lack of imagination from the Indian leadership in the earlier decades. Current Prime Minister Modi has gone bypassing Singapore, if you would like to say so, especially in reaching out to Indonesia and Thailand as extension of Indian cultural diaspora rather than working through this. Also with the rising cost of living and the immigration rules, I no longer see Singapore as a destination of choice for Indian digital side, which Ms. Chan mentioned in there. I see more and more Dubai and UAE coming as an option. So considering that, how do you see Singapore's importance to India? Or do you see it going down as we're talking about the future in there? Thank you.
Look, I think it's not just Ayurveda, but I think all traditional medicine. Today there is a huge rediscovery of the virtues of Chinese medicine or Tibetan medicine or, you name it, because there is a certain dissatisfaction with the Western medical practices. I mean, all you need is to go on YouTube. I mean, we don't need the governments to do anything. The number of, familiar, what have evolved over cultural practice over a longer time. So you have enormous amounts of arguments and development. But I think in Ayurveda case or other traditional forms of medicine, I think the government of India has announced new investments. And I think in terms of here again, I think we could do more with the Chinese, Singapore and others as well. So I think that's an open-ended, I think, starting from knowledge to actually getting the medical systems to work together. So I don't think Singapore is going to lose its advantage. Look, I think here is the situation. Other day we have actually, somebody did a study in Delhi. Today the advanced industrial countries, assuming Singapore is part of it, would need at least 50 million, shortage of 50 million workforce when it comes to the new industries. So there is actually going to be a shortage of skilled professionals across the world. To some extent, India is trying to bridge this by what is it called, the migration and mobility agreements that India has been signing with a large number of European countries wherever we can. So therefore, you're going to have the demand for Indian professional engineering, STEM and other graduates is only going to grow. And I think there will be a competition, I think, for that pool. We saw, I can give you the Germany's example. We barely 1 year ago, we signed the migration and mobility agreement. They've already, I think, almost 20,000 Indian professionals moved in the last 2 years. I mean, despite the language and the toxicity of the immigration issue in Europe, there is, I think, within that framework, I think all countries are struggling with two issues: good immigration and bad immigration, at least in the West. There's unwanted immigration and there is wanted immigration. So finding that balance and the policies. So I would say, I think Singapore still, I would say, stands number one in terms of the comfort level that the Indians have than any other place. So I don't see it going, but my sense is, depending on how the overall industrial distribution of industrial production unfolds, the demand grows up. And my sense is Singapore can actually help India, the skilling mission, not just in terms of the industrial level skilling mission, but actually if we focus on preparing the new workforce, as our Prime Minister called the global workplace, that if the workplace is going to go global, India has a surplus manpower. How can Singapore, with its best educational institutions, including the one we are in, the NUS and others, how do we use the Singapore's capacity to upgrade the skills of the Indian professionals so that they get ready for a global workplace? There, I think I would say there's more room for cooperation rather than merely seeing today who's moving where. I think those are not genuine, but I think the deeper convergence between India and Singapore, I think, is even bigger.
Kami, can I invite you to address the Dubai-Singapore
Sure.
comparison? Because I know that's something that we've spoken about and you've talked. But also, could I ask you to maybe also follow up from what Raja just mentioned about the skilling partnership as well? That's something that we've not addressed. So.
Yeah, no. Well, of course, I wanted to make a side to Ayurveda because we haven't. There's a healthcare discussion going on, although we haven't talked about Ayurveda specifically. But we always forget that yoga is something, a gift that India gave to all of us, and it's thriving in Singapore. But so yes, I think on the Dubai issue, I think India is a rising middle class. It's come to the world stage. It has an increasingly mobile population, and I don't see it as a bad thing. Indians are going out, doing business, working elsewhere, gaining experiences. And as you have 1.2 billion people, Singapore is a very, very small country. So we can't expect to also take in everyone. I'm sure they're going to Dubai. I'm sure they're going to the rest of Southeast Asia. And it's a good thing. There will be different reasons why people want to go to Dubai and for their business, their relationships, as well as the business to the west of India, and then reasons why some of the Indian companies, individuals, and professionals come to Singapore. As you know, the compass and immigration policies that we have is good immigration and bad immigration, but also trying to find a way to balance, right? I mean, making sure that the right skill sets are here for the right industries, and being a very small, resource-constrained island, I think we have to make those decisions. But having said that, I think if you look around you, I mean, this really, we welcome everyone, and people come, jobs, business deals, short-term visits, in every sector. I don't think that we have limited, put in quotas in that sense. It's really ultimately demand in that sector for it, for us. And of course, for Singapore, we also have to balance with creating jobs and making sure that there is enough good jobs for Singaporeans as well. So that's that fine balance. I think that looking at Dubai, I think that they have certain industries that are growing there, and I think that it's a very different kind of. We have what we're going for us is good governance, trust. So if you want to develop certain new technologies, IP, startups, I think this is the place where you can come and trial certain ideas, and with that framework that we have, IP, data protection laws. I think that's what we can say that we have in Singapore for the right type of entrepreneurs and businesses here as well. The other thing that you want to talk about, skilling, yes. We have been working with India on skilling for a long time. I think since Prime Minister Modi came to power, I think he's focused very rightly so on skilling the population to be able to take on and the jobs and also the growth in the economy is right now at the cusp of that manufacturing growth. And I think we've been working with India initially in very specific skill centers in Delhi and in Assam, in Rajasthan. And going forward, we're looking at tightening the connect between industry and skilling, and to ensure that there's a pipeline of people who are skilled for the industries, and very specific ones. So I think we've probably identified a few. These could be semiconductor, it could be in aviation, MRO, or even specifically digital. So we're looking at very specific sectors where we have some expertise and India is interested and to grow that sector as well. And we're looking to see how we can work to tighten that connection between industry and what companies need and the pipeline of skilled talent that will go there in these clusters, as well as the skilling agencies. So India already has a well-honed framework and curriculum for the sectors, but I think here we're just trying to target very specific sectors where we have some experience. So again, advanced manufacturing and aviation, I think these are the ones that where we will work with India more closely. Yeah.
I think two parts. My name is Sanjay Gujral. Two parts to my question. The first is in the shifting geopolitical order, any prognosis vis-a-vis the entire de-dollarization debate and valuation of currencies and what impact that may have vis-a-vis India, ASEAN trade flows? And the second part to that is that Singapore has been one of the largest providers of FDI into India, be that direct Singaporean businesses or Singapore as a hub coming in. But on the flip side, you have India setting up compete with Singapore and Singapore's role as a hub. Any direction or guidance towards greater integration of the financial markets between the two countries?
Yeah, good morning. Gurdeep Singh from Press Trust of India. My question is for Ms. Chan. You mentioned about restarting India-Singapore initiative to venture into Africa and emerging markets. India is also negotiating some FTAs with that region. When do you see this restart, and do you see Singapore and India combined to do some of the FTAs or trade pacts that would be favorable? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not a finance expert, but I will have to say that actually we see that as complementary with GIFT. I think the SGX has a collaboration with the NSE in GIFT itself, and actually many of our banks. I think DBS is also in GIFT in a big way. So I think that the products, I think GIFT was intended as, again, one of these pilots where they will be able to allow India to trade with the external financial markets and maybe come up with more innovative products in Gift City, and I think that that's how we're trying to work with Gift. So again, for us, it's complementary at this point, but we should ask the financiers what they think. And on to Gurdeep's question about Africa. Actually, I was just saying that was something that we have talked about previously, but it's, well, who knows? I mean, we have no concrete plans as to FTAs yet. I think Singapore, again, is also very uninitiated in Africa. We have been going on business trips, but we don't have an FTA even with any of the African partners or regions. We're looking and exploring, but I think India has been there for a long time, and I think that it's that kind of relationships and connection linkages that we want to work on together, whether business JVs, joint ventures, or trading partners. We're keen to tap into that knowledge and relationships. But again, who knows? I mean, it's ideas that we could bring up, and but we're not immediately running into an FTA, in a regional FTA necessarily at this point. But.
Yeah, and I think the Gift City is nowhere near competing with Singapore. I mean, I think we have a long way to go. I mean, even putting up the basic infrastructure, getting people, making it attractive to come. So it's really nowhere near that. In fact, at this point, we need Singapore's collaboration and a lot of other financial centers' collaboration. So rather than, it's nowhere. I mean, I think if India had gone a different direction after 1947, Bombay perhaps would have been a major, financial center, but today it's not. And the reason why you're starting late, better late than never, you're starting something, but I think it'll need decades, at least before it really captures at least a section of the global financial flows. On de-dollarization, look, I think there's a lot of romance about de-dollarization. This is my view, again, I'm not an expert, but Trump himself might do it for you. This idea of BRICS is going to carry the flag of de-dollarization, or that everybody in the BRICS would want to jump from dollar to yuan. I don't think that is the truth at all. But the real change will come from the US itself. Because if you look at the arguments that are being made in the US, one reason for the US lack of competitiveness is the high price of US dollar. While the high price of dollar attracts foreign money into the US, it actually prices out American exports. One reason for American manufacturing decline is the dollar. And I think if you read Robert Lighthizer book, the previous USTR, he's actually advocating for a managed reduction in the value of the dollar. And I think this is what Plaza Accord did in 1985. Today when we talk about a Mar-a-Lago Accord, it's a question of doing that. But doing it, what Secretary Besant is saying, you want to reduce the value of the dollar without taking away the primacy of the dollar. How exactly that they can do it, we don't know. But I think quite clearly the US itself would want to see a reduction in the value of the dollar. And I think this debate about dollar, it was said, was an exorbitant privilege for the United States. That it can print what it wants, it can actually suck in the world's flows, but saying the other saying it's also an exorbitant problem for the United States that the dollar is so strong. So I think there will be some adjustment. That's what I mentioned in my initial remarks. The Mad King, if you will, has not attacked the financial system yet, but I think it's coming in terms of rethinking the global financial system and how that will play itself out.
That semi-ominous note brings us to an end to this session. Thank you to both panelists for sharing their thoughts, but also thank you for all of you for being here. This has been a great start for the morning, and we will continue in the afternoon. So thank you, everybody. There's coffee and tea, and let's continue the conversation over some food as well. So please join me in panelists.